Thanks so much. Maybe I'll stand so I can be sure to see everyone. And I'm excited to talk with you about the research that we did. So to correspond with the 2012 election, I am interested in research on religion and in American foreign policy in particular. I'm a professor in the political science department at UALR. And so in 2012, I just thought, wow, what a great opportunity to think about religion and politics, because here we have this election where there's been all sorts of interesting conversations in the country about President Obama's religious background and religious connections, and here we have the first Mormon candidate from a major party running. Let's see how people feel about religion and how it's influencing their connections in the community and their political activities here in 2012. And so it started with a grant to send out surveys to all of the religious organizations in Little Rock. In the city limits of Little Rock, there are 409 churches, which I was quite impressed with, but maybe because I'm still fairly new to the South. Seemed like a lot of churches. So 409 in the city limits of Little Rock, and all of them got a survey, a short 2-page survey to the congregation leader. And there was a 16% response rate. And then from those, it was approximately 65 that were returned. I selected a representative sample of about 15 to do in-depth interviews with, to talk about theology and talk about political activities of these congregations with the congregation leaders. And from those, we selected 5 churches and the freethinkers to conduct research on. So these 6 groups were chosen, and in order to keep the confidence of all these congregations, I'm not going to tell you the specific churches that we went to. You already know we came to you, so when I write this up, I'll say a non-religious organization. Make sure that I get the right language in there. But I won't name freethinkers specifically, but since you know that I came here. The freethinkers, a Mormon congregation, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which the other 4 we tried to keep were representative of the major religions that exist in Little Rock. They're about 2% of the population that are Mormon, but we decided to investigate them anyway because of this particular election and Mitt Romney's candidacy. So we had a Black Protestant congregation, a mainline Protestant congregation, a Catholic, and an evangelical Protestant congregation. So I taught a class in the fall of 2012, and you got to know a couple of my students. And what we did was we sent about 2 to 4 students to each of these congregations to do some research on them. And they administered surveys to these congregations before and after the 2012 election. And there were 602 total surveys returned for 492, I believe, unique respondents. So some people did both the pre and the post survey, but there were 492 unique respondents to this survey and about a 36% response rate. So let me tell you a little bit about the groups that we looked at, the congregation demographics. So we found that most congregations, and including the freethinkers, not to call you a congregation, but most groups that we looked at, were pretty balanced in terms of gender, about a 50-50 split. There were 2 that we found a definite imbalance, and those are the Black Protestant congregation and the Catholic congregation had many more women than men in their congregations. The mainline Protestant congregation that we selected for this study was the most educated congregation. It is a fairly large congregation, fairly wealthy, and most educated, with the average education being a college graduate with some additional postgraduate education. The least educated group was our evangelical group. The Evangelical Protestant Church was a rural church that had a much smaller congregation, and they were the least educated congregation that we had. The age, the evangelical church was also a much older congregation. It was also not a very wealthy congregation. Their average age was 63. And the youngest congregation was the Mormons, with their average age was 43, so much younger than the evangelical congregation. The mainline Protestant congregation was the wealthiest, The Catholic congregation that we selected was a large Catholic congregation also that was quite wealthy, just behind the mainline Protestant congregation. And the poorest was the Black Protestant congregation. And we asked them about class as well, and we saw a correspondence there between class as well. So in investigating, we asked a lot of questions, and it was a great experience for the students being in this class because they got to think about research design and what kind of questions they wanted to ask and what kind of things they wanted to investigate, what might influence what, how can we ask the right questions to get at that. So they got to help in the designing of the surveys. And so we asked a lot of questions about religion. And one of the things we asked about was something called providential religious beliefs. And so people who hold providential religious beliefs believe that God has a plan and that they can help bring that plan about. And we thought, you know, if we want to get at how religious belief can really influence politics, this might be the type of religious belief that we want to look at. Because people who believe that they're bringing about God's plan, you know, they might be really into being politically active, you know, to try to help facilitate what they see as God's will in the world. So we asked some questions to measure providentiality, and then we were also interested in a separate concept of religiosity, which is more about religious behavior. So not so much about what you believe, believing that you know God's will, but how you actually behave. So we asked questions about how regularly you attend church or read Holy Scripture or pray. And so we asked these questions to try to get at religion. The group that was the strongest providential believers was Black Protestants, followed by evangelicals, and the least providential believers of the churches were the mainline Protestant. And the freethinkers, you will not be surprised to know, were not at all providential. But I will let you know that there is someone who was at Reason in the Rock who said that they pray occasionally. Everyone else said that they pray never, but someone from Reason in the Rock prays occasionally. So the religiosity, the religious behavior was not at zero. There was a spike, a bump there. The most religious behaviors are the evangelical group. They're the ones who are most regularly going to church and praying and reading scriptures. Mormons are next behind them, and then Black Protestants behind them. So one of the things that we were really interested in is what kinds of political messages are being communicated in these groups. So we asked this question, which is regularly asked in national surveys, about how often you've heard sermons or homilies by the pastor or priest here that and we give them a number of options. If they had heard a sermon that spoke against same-sex marriage, that encouraged you to get involved in a local political cause, a national political cause, encouraged you to volunteer in the community, urged you to register to vote, or spoke out against abortion. If you took the survey, you'll perhaps recall that it was a similar question but slightly tweaked. I believe that it said if you have heard someone at the group speak about same-sex marriage instead of speak against same-sex marriage. So asking all these members of these congregations about this, we wanted to hear, we also asked congregation leaders in that original survey that went out to all 406 churches how often they address this. And here we wanted to see if the people in the congregation were getting these messages as well. And we found that evangelicals are hearing the most political messages in church. So the scores ranged from 6 to 18. Across all of the groups, there was an average of 11.84. And evangelicals have a score of 14.76. So they're hearing a lot more political messages. Black Protestants had a score of 14.11. So they are also hearing a lot of political messages when they're going to church. The score of freethinkers is higher than the average across all these churches, so you're getting more political messages here than the average in the sample at 12.64. And we found some really interesting differences in content. So which of these issues do you think freethinkers talk about the most?
Getting involved. Getting involved.
You think getting involved in local and political causes?
Probably same-sex marriage.
Same-sex marriage was statistically the highest one.
Not against it.
Not against it. No, remember the wording was slightly different for the Freethinker survey, not speaking against same-sex marriage, but speaking about same-sex marriage. Yeah, so substantively, that's the topic that Freethinkers talks about the most in terms of these choices of political discussions. Now, what about evangelicals? What do they talk about the most?
Abortion.
Abortion and same-sex marriage. Same issue being discussed, but abortion also was very high on the list. And then the Catholics had very high conversations about abortion, but not about same-sex marriage so much. Let me see in my notes if there were any other interesting differences in content. The people who heard the least political messages were the Mormon congregation, was the very least in terms of political content in their sermons. And the mainline Protestant congregation also had very low political content. And what political content they did have was more maybe innocuous, you would think. It was about volunteering. Both of those had far and above the one that was reported the most was encouraging members to serve or volunteer in the community. You had very little conversation in those congregations about same-sex marriage or about abortion, hardly any at all. So in terms of political messages, we're definitely seeing differences in the number of political messages that are happening, and we're seeing differences in the type of political messages that are being communicated. Another thing that we looked at was the political unity of these congregations. So we asked respondents how they would compare your views with other members of your congregation on political issues. And so if they reported a 1, that would be that my views are more conservative than the rest of the people in the group. A 3 is about the same, and a 5 would be my views are more liberal than the rest of the group. So Mormons are actually the most divided congregation that we looked at here, with a score of 2.11. So most people who are attending the particular Mormon congregation that we surveyed believe that they are more conservative than the rest of the people in the congregation. The Catholics are the most united with remember, if they have a score of 3, that would mean everybody feels like I do in this congregation. So they're slightly off of that at 2.8, with some of the members of the Catholic congregation thinking that they are more conservative. The Freethinkers were also quite politically united compared to the rest of the sample, slightly off of that baseline of 3 at 3.25, with among your group, some of you reporting that your views are more liberal than the views of the rest of the group. And one of the things that one of our students actually was interested in investigating was whether these unified groups are more politically active. So if you believe that everyone else feels the same as you do in terms of your political opinions, are you more likely to get politically active? Yeah?
Were liberal and conservative defined as terms in the survey, or did you just allow the respondents to define them however they want? Like, I mean, is it liberal or conservative in the context of the questions that were previously asked about issues like gay marriage and abortion would be the two, I guess, fairly big political issues there that have defined meanings as far as liberal and conservative, or were they answering with respect to economic policy as well? Or how were liberal and conservative defined?
Yeah, so for the respondents, when they came to this question, all they had was, how would you compare your views with other congregation members on political issues? And then they had arrayed choices from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, with 1 defined as mine more conservative and 5 as mine more liberal. So how they decided what they were thinking of when they answer that question, we don't entirely know. There were questions about the class of your congregation. There were questions about income, so maybe that had primed them to think about economics. They, of course, had answered on the previous page these questions about, do you hear sermons on these particular topics? So they may have been thinking about that. There is a question on the first page about where they would place themselves on a liberal to conservative ideology spectrum, and also party identification, so maybe they were thinking in those terms. All we have is this question to know. I know there's going to be a lot of questions, and it's really, I think it's interesting to dive into this data and find out all of these relationships, so I'm excited to answer all of the questions you have. Do you want to go quickly before I move forward? Yeah.
What I notice here is that the way that you are counting it here, if you had 2 people that answered 3, you would have exactly the same results as if you had one person who answered 1 and one person who answered 5.
Yep.
So it's actually a measure of how closely people's opinion of how they relate to other people compares with the actual distribution. It's are there more people who believe themselves to be more conservative, or are there more people who believe themselves to be more liberal than the
Exactly. It's an individual's view of what they think is going on in the rest of the congregation and where they stand.
Yeah.
Now, you're exactly right that numerically it would be the same average, but it is distinguishable in the data because we can look at the variance in the. So I don't have that on the up for us right now, but we can pull that apart in the data and see, is this a congregation where the variance is very low because everyone's saying that we have the same opinions, or is this just a crazy divided congregation where half the people say, no, I'm way conservative, and the other half are saying, no, I'm way liberal, and it's just really divided. We didn't see much evidence of that happening. The congregation where we might have seen that the most would have been the mainline Protestant congregation, where the most divided. And I do have some data on vote choice, and they were the most divided in terms of who they voted for. We did have 2 of our 6 groups who voted 100% entirely for one candidate or for the other. So those were congregations that were quite unified in their politics. I mean, I'm surprised if you could get 60 people to all say that the sky is blue. Right? We had 60 people in a congregation to all say that they were voting for one candidate or for the other. So some of these were quite united congregations. The Catholic congregation was not one of them. It was quite a large congregation. We had a couple of hundred there. So, and even the Mormon congregation, as one of our most reported the most political division in the congregation, the Mormon congregation did not vote entirely for Mitt Romney, and we'll talk about in a moment some of those results of vote choice. So are politically unified groups more politically active? This was one of our questions. If you feel like everybody agrees with you, are you more likely to get out and be involved in politics because you're hearing these reinforcing messages and everyone shares your same viewpoints? Actually, no, there's not. The correlation between political unity and political activity is extremely low at 0.03. It's not a statistically significant correlation. So we don't see that political unity as leading to more political activity. So let's talk about how we measured political activity. So we asked respondents, how often have you done the following in the last year? And then there are 6 things here that represent political activities. Persuaded someone to vote, donated to a campaign, were a volunteer for a campaign, attended a rally, put a bumper sticker on your car or your window, or signed a petition. So the scores range from never doing any of these things in the last year to doing, which would get you a score of 4. I'm sorry, that is a typo. That would get you a score of 6, to doing each of these things multiple times, which would get you a score of 24. And so the average across all of our respondents is 9.41. The Freethinkers are our most politically active group with a score of 11.28, and Catholics, who you'll recall heard a lot of political messages, are our least politically active group with a score of 8.85. So we also don't see a relationship here between political activity and political messages from the congregation leaders. So what does predict political activity? So trying to understand political activity, I ran a statistical model that I'm not giving you the full results of here, but I am going to tell you the highlights of them. So among the respondents that we have, what predicts political activity? First of all, we had a question about how much do you care who wins the election in 2012, the presidential election? And people who reported that they care very much about who wins are more likely to be politically active. So I guess that's a good thing that people are kind of putting their money where their mouth is. If they care a lot about who wins, then they're getting politically active. We also found that trusting in government makes you more likely to be active. And I'll show you some questions about trust in government that we asked here in another slide or two. But people who have more trust in government are more likely to participate in the political process. Political scientists call this efficacy. They have political efficacy, feel like that they can make a difference by participating politically. We also asked a series of questions about what the relationship of religion and politics should be, and people who believe that religion and politics should be separate, like people in this group, are also more likely to be politically active. And finally, we found that hearing political sermons, being very religious, or being a providential believer, remember believing that you can bring about God's will, none of those things are significant predictors of political activity. So people, whether they hear a lot of political sermons or not very many at all, it doesn't affect how active they are politically. So these congregation leaders, the evangelical congregation, the Black Protestant congregation, the Catholic congregation, who are telling lots and lots of political messages over the pulpit, they're not having an effect on their congregation's political activity. People who are more likely to pray or go to church aren't more likely to be politically active. We asked a question at the very end, and this is the text of the question wording, that some people think it's more important to vote for someone who shares their views on political issues. Others think it's more important to vote for someone who shares their views, their values and religious beliefs. Which is more important to you in a candidate? 1 being shares political views and 4 being shares religious views. The freethinkers are most towards the political end of the spectrum with a score of 1.28. Evangelicals were most strongly said that religious views are what matters in voting for a candidate with a score of 3.5. So definitely major differences here between the groups that we surveyed. These are the questions we asked about the relationship between religion and politics. And there were 5 questions. And we asked them whether they strongly agree, strongly disagree, or disagree with each of these questions. So one of them is religion has a positive effect on American political life. Civil liberties are threatened by groups imposing their religion. Religious people of different denominations need to cooperate in politics. It makes no difference to God which party's in power, and religious leaders should try to influence public affairs. So the scores ranged from 8 to 20 with an average of 14. Higher numbers mean more discomfort with religion and politics being together. So religion has a positive effect. If you strongly disagreed with that, you would get a higher score. So the freethinkers had a score of 15.96, which is our highest score on this particular battery about what the relationship between religion and politics should be. And what group do you think had our lowest score? The most wanted religion and politics together? The Mormons. The Mormons were the most comfortable with religion and politics being intertwined with a score of 12.71. Let me see if I know right offhand what the evangelicals were. You know, the evangelicals were not that different. They were about at the average. Maybe surprisingly, the Black Protestants had a score of 15.29. They're statistically indistinguishable from the freethinkers in terms of their views about the relationship between religion and politics. So the Black Protestant congregation was our most religious in terms of behavior congregation, but in terms of how they view religion in American politics, they have a view, they express a level of discomfort that is similar to statistically indistinguishable from this group.
When was this survey done?
It was done right before and after the election.
Right before, okay.
Yep. Which actually leads me to our very interesting Black Protestant congregation. Oh, there they are, 15.29. One of the reasons why I'm really appreciative to you for participating in this is because of the great opportunity it gave our undergraduates to have experience conducting research and answering hypotheses and getting into research questions of their own. So we had a couple of undergraduates that I'll share some of their research findings with you. And we had a couple of these students just present their research at the Arkansas Political Science Association conference. And one of them has just got accepted to 3 different graduate schools that she's deciding between right now. And part of the reason why she had such a successful application process was because of this experience that graduate schools are really looking for. So thank you for helping to make that possible for the students. This student was interested in looking at religion and trust in government. Is there a relationship between religion and trust in government? Because there is research out there about a relationship between people who are more religious having more civic skills, because they learn civic skills through organizing bake sales and teaching Sunday school or things like that within churches. And we also have literature about people who are more religious having more interpersonal trust, more trust among people. But there hasn't been a lot of research done on how religion might affect trust in government. So that's what this student was looking at. So this is a battery of 5 questions about trust in government that are asked in political science surveys all the time, asking if government is run by big interests, looking out for themselves or the benefit of all the people. Can you trust the government to do what's right? Are most people running the government crooked? Do most people running the government not know what they're doing? And does the government waste a lot of money we pay in taxes? Well, across the board, the strongest, the scores range from 5 to 15 with an average of 9.38. And the one that people have the least trust in government in is in terms of how they spend tax dollars. That's where you get the highest scores in terms of lack of trust. People think the government is wasting a lot of the money. So when we looked at our congregations in terms of their trust, freethinkers had a trust score of 8.93, which is lower than average, so more, I guess that makes sense, right? More skeptics here in the audience. Black Protestants had the highest trust score at 10.68. Now this is really surprising finding because Black Protestants are traditionally a segment of the population that are the least trusting of government. And we have a long literature about lots of really important historical and institutional reasons why Black Protestants don't have a lot of trust in government. But for this survey, it comes up that Black Protestants are, in a statistically significant way, the most trusting of all of the congregations that we surveyed. So what's going on? It'll take a little bit more research to figure it out, but it may be something in particular about this congregation. It may be something in particular about Little Rock. I think that it's probably the fact that we have an African-American president leads to a lot more trust in government from groups that traditionally didn't have a lot of trust in government at all. Another student in her undergraduate research was interested in understanding vote confidence. So when we ask people, who are you going to vote for in the election, we then ask them from a scale of 0 to 100, how confident are you that this candidate, the one that you would pick if the election were today, is the best candidate for president? And overall, people were really confident in their choices, saying 87%, or a score of 87 on the scale of 0 to 100 was the average score for how confident people felt in the choice that they were making for president. Freethinkers had a score of 89 in your choice for president, so just above average in terms of level of confidence. Black Protestants were the most confident in their vote choice, and Black Protestants also voted entirely, or reported that they would vote entirely for Barack Obama. Everyone in the congregation put their vote that way, and had a confidence in that, the highest confidence in the sample at 91. Evangelicals had the lowest level of confidence. And interestingly, the evangelical congregation is the one that entirely voted for Romney. So the Black Protestants entirely voted for Obama and had the most confidence, and the evangelicals entirely voted for Romney and had the least confidence in their vote choice. The Mormon congregation had a confidence of 90, which is slightly above average. And in the Mormon congregation, there were some people who voted for Romney and some people who voted for Obama. What was really interesting is that this student found a statistically significant difference in the level of confidence from those who chose Romney and those who chose Obama. So if you are in this Mormon congregation, you're Mormon, and you are deciding that you're going to vote for Romney, you felt really good about that at about 91, which corresponds, to the level of confidence of the Black Protestant congregation voting for Barack Obama. You're feeling really good about that choice. If you're in the Mormon congregation and you're voting for Obama, you're a little more unsure. You're not quite as confident in that choice. And with a score of 78 is the average of confidence level of Obama voters in the Mormon congregation. So this was a really great experience for the students, and there's tons of data that I'm excited to continue to sort through and look at all of these different relationships. We also ran a model about what predicts confidence, and interestingly enough, people who hear political sermons are less confident in their vote choice. So it's really interesting, these political messages coming out over the pulpit. I don't think they're doing what congregation leaders want them to do, because they're not causing people to be more active. They're not causing them to be more confident in their selection for president in 2012. And I'm sure there are lots of questions, and I'm looking forward to talking about it. So thank you so much.
Well, I was just going to say, some of you didn't participate in the survey. They came to some of our meetings, they came to some of our events that we had, they also came to Reason in the Rock. So that's where the questionnaires were handed out, and that's who answered, in our group, who answered the questions. I was going to ask, are you going over this with any of the congregations? Are they interested?
Yeah, they all have asked for the results, and I am working on putting together a report right now, trying to decide what are the key findings, what do I want to highlight, and I'll be sending that out to all the congregation leaders and to your group as well. And I'll make it not too scholarly, but it'll probably be, 5 or 10 pages of kind of the highlights, and put some nice graphs in there, some comparative analysis.
Great, and we want to participate in any things that your class is doing in the future too, because we want to help.
Thank you so much. I mean, it was a great experience for them. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
When you started out with the issue of providentiality, in the end, it doesn't seem to match. I mean, if they are believers in providentiality, it doesn't seem strongly to be that their plan of action to help God is political. Is that
Exactly.
Is that a correct conclusion?
Exactly.
Evangelicals might be the strongest in it, but overall, religion and they're not pulling out of it that they should be real politically active. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so I think we had the students attend meetings here and attend a number of congregations as well, and they're still working on some content analysis of the messages that are being communicated, but it seems like, the evangelicals are real strong providential believers. They really believe that God has a plan, but they don't seem to believe that they bring that plan about through engaging politically. Now, there definitely are groups in the United States who believe that God has a plan and they can bring that plan about by political action, but we're not seeing it, at least in it may be on an individual level if we can pull out from some of the interviews, but on a statistical level, looking broadly, providential beliefs are not having an effect on political activity at all.
Have you gotten any feedback from preachers doing the political stuff from the pulpit that their response that it doesn't work?
I haven't asked them if they think it works or not. I think most of them are, even if they are communicating a lot of political messages, they're not saying, I'm trying to persuade my congregation, because most people are not, even very religious people are not comfortable with the idea of their religious leader telling them how to vote or trying to get them politically active. So I haven't heard from any of the leaders, and I think if I were to ask them, even those who are communicating a lot of messages, they would say, I'm just talking about values in my conscience. I'm not trying to encourage political activity.
Not so much a question as a speculation. It seems to me that if the Republican nominee had been an evangelical Christian rather than a Mormon, the enthusiasm would have been much higher among the evangelicals for that particular candidate.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are actually really reflecting the evangelicals holding their nose to vote for Romney, right? They all voted for him, but they weren't real confident in that choice. So I think you're right. You know, you might have seen, I think it's interesting to think that the vote probably wouldn't have changed, but people's enthusiasm, right, their confidence in their vote choice might have been much higher. Yeah.
And they might have been more active as far as donating and campaigning.
That might have been reflected in some more political activity. Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion about the huge growth in the nuns population in the United States, people who have no religion.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, you know, is there any way to compare the response of people who are engaged in this group with the nuns on things like trust in government or, you know, church-state separation? And I'm curious about whether we're representative of the nuns or whether we're kind of a subset of the nuns in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would love to be able to find a group of nuns and to survey them, but I'm not Catholic nuns, but religious nuns. But it's difficult because they're not organized, right? So you are organized, which I appreciate because I can come here, but I hope I'm not mischaracterizing and saying that this is an atheist organization.
I'm agnostic.
Okay. And so I didn't want to put free thinkers in here, not atheists. Which is different than the nuns. So people who are saying, who social scientists are researching, who are calling themselves nuns, are people who say, "What religion are you?" And they say, "Oh, none." But that doesn't. They might believe in God. They might feel very spiritual, but they're not identifying with a particular religious tradition. I think that is a distinct category from the free thinkers. We can compare because there is national data, like from the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life has national data, and some of these questions are common, so we could compare how similar and how different. But of course, this is a much smaller sample that's just looking at Little Rock, but it can give us an idea of how representative it might be. But I think you're right in saying that there are distinct groups.
The providentiality, what could you do something like check out our legislature to see what happens there? Because I really do think that's going on. And to me, it's frightening. And, you know, it'd be an interesting thing because I know it kind of, some people don't want to speak out, they just go with the flow. And I think an evangelical person started something that was just, you know, everybody couldn't say no. So they voted and they vetoed our governor even.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So my research is actually, I'm outside of my realm here in looking at American politics. And there were a few questions about foreign policy, which I didn't bring out today to highlight. But that's more where my expertise is. So I've looked at providential beliefs in the past in terms... Yeah, I've looked in terms of foreign policy attitudes and using experiments. So if you change the way foreign policy is framed, does that change people's support for it? And so if you frame a foreign policy as, we're doing this because it's God's will that we protect this country or help out our fellow man or something like that, then I haven't done anything on abortion because I mostly do foreign policy. But you do see statistically significant results in terms of people who are providential believers. If you frame a foreign policy in those terms, they're more likely to support it. So I am sure you could replicate something experimentally, or it's always hard. Self-reports are always hard because, right, members of the legislature have lots of reasons to say one thing or another that may or may not be an actual reflection of their true beliefs. But I think that providential beliefs do have an effect. I think that we're not seeing it statistically here for a couple of reasons. One, perhaps because people that we've surveyed don't see politics as being God's will, or because there are people, just not enough to show up statistically. But it's a few people, right? The ones who are out, you know, picketing Planned Parenthood every single weekend, but there's only 4 of them in the Catholic congregation out of 200 respondents, so we don't see that statistically.
Yeah, I was really interested in the, you know, you talk about the free thinkers not using, not using the religious test for a candidate, and then and others may or may not. But I was just curious because, like, if we do a survey here in this group here, Christopher Hitchens was, probably one of the most outspoken atheists of our generation, but yet he was fairly conservative, pretty Republican in his beliefs, or at least some of them were. And I was wondering if we get a show of hands here, if there was a candidate that, say you were very liberal Democratic, and there was a candidate that was an atheist, but held all the exact opposite political groups, views, would you vote, who would vote for somebody who's an atheist just for that reason?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting to see.
So
right,
nobody would.
This is a group that in large part defines itself by its religious views, right? That's what brought you all together, was a shared view on religion. But yet that doesn't have an impact on your vote choice. Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Well, part of that is because we don't have anything to vote for.
Yeah, because no atheists are running for office.
It's not California.
No one else is saying there.
Does anybody else?
Right, there you go.
Anybody else have any questions?
One of the things that people figured out a long time ago about any kind of social survey like this is that the wording on the questions can be something that has a big effect on what kind of results you get.
Absolutely.
Slight changes in wording can give big changes in the results. And as a consequence, attitude surveys and things like that for years have had two big issues that they try to look at in the design of it, namely reliability and validity. Reliability often by, how repeatable is this, and then validity by trying to tie it to some other kind of a measure of whatever it is you're trying to measure. What, if anything, was done with this in terms of trying to establish reliability or validity on the survey?
I believe every question that we asked is a question that has been vetted by a major survey organization. So the students, when they were coming up with what did they want to find out, they weren't inventing questions out of scratch. They were researching survey organizations, the American National Election Survey, the General Sociological Survey, and other major surveys of congregations specifically, to find questions that have been repeated again and again and have been accepted by the political science literature as being valid questions.
One in particular that I would wonder about is how many of these things overlap with stuff like the Pew research or any of the other major surveys that have been done on religious views.
Yeah, absolutely. And the students were looking in particular at surveys of religious groups that have been done before, as well as big national surveys like the ANES that have been done before, in order to pull questions that have a track record of being good at getting at the attitudes that we want to examine. So none of these questions are questions that students wrote themselves. They're all questions that have been vetted by major survey organizations.
When at Skepticon this year, Rebecca Watson did a talk on how magazines and different groups skew survey results by the way they ask the questions and they manipulate the statistics to say whatever they want it to say, like that blondes, I don't know, you remember, Dave, what it was? It was something about blondes and oh, that's right. And they like published this result in a major newspaper, and people were thinking that it was a real survey, and it really wasn't. It had been completely skewed by the way they asked the questions. So you have to be careful on surveys when you read about them.
Yeah, and people who are doing anything for a for-profit organization or for even Gallup these days has been criticized because a lot of the work they do is in marketing, and it is for profit, and they're even losing some respectability. But anything that's published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, that is something that you can trust, because you have multiple scientists or political scientists, social scientists looking at it and saying, okay, these are valid questions. The methodology is okay here.
Speaking of invalid survey methods, are you familiar with the Newsmax website?
I don't think so.
They have pop-ups from a lot of other websites, and they ask basically questions it's an ultra-conservative. They basically will do a survey in which the only accepted answers are conservative answers.
Yeah.
It was like, which is more important to you, to lower taxes or cut spending? Those are the only choices.
And then they only ask it of the people who visit the conservative website that afternoon, right?
Yeah,
so.
well, and it's like they only count your vote if you sign up to subscribe to their email spam. That's a condition. When you reach the end of the survey, the condition for it is you give them your email address and consent to accepting
Yeah,
their
we're hoping to do much better research than that here.
If you're interested, you can go online and see Rebecca's talk online for Skepticon from this last year. So, I mean, it is interesting. It's kind of the same thing where she talked about not being tricked by surveys and what the results were.
Well, now I was saying that I've always been nonpartisan in my vote. Mm-hmm. And after I saw, I think he's a Senator Rayford, I felt like he really was doing his, I thought a politician put religion to the side, and I think that did happen, so now it's going to change my vote. And I've never voted just one party. And it's like, now I guess I'm changing my view. I wish you'd do the study so I know.
There's lots of things I could say about Rayford, but I won't. I won't right now.
Well, thanks for your participation in this, and thanks for letting me come speak to you.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.